So if you're European and have noticed that the weather is warmer now than when you were a kid, well, you're not exactly imagining things. Because over the past 30 years, temperatures there have risen faster than anywhere else on Earth. And of course, Europe isn't immune to the effects of global warming, which is now pretty much felt all over the globe. And also, inaction on the issue of rising global temperatures, floodings, and the energy crisis, which is having quite a significant influence on Europe's economy, might just have dire implications. Yeah, granted, it's a lot to take in for the beginning of a video, but let's see what this means for Europe's economy and also what it means for you. But before we get into the heavy stuff, we're pleased to see you here again at Econify. We'd love to know what you think of our videos, so if you have a moment, do let us know in the comment section below. And also, while you're down there, like, share, subscribe, and join us as we investigate the effects of global warming on the European economy. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The human and financial implications of climate change have become more apparent after a lot of summers with high heat, wildfires, and floods all across Europe. And the European Central Bank has released a fresh analysis that confirms the dire implications of postponing or failing to act on climate change. And in a landmark effort to ease the global transition to a net zero carbon economy, the European Central Bank warned that the region's banks and corporations are going to face huge economic losses and financial instability if nothing is done about the problem. Now that the findings of the first national climate stress test have been released, it is clear why. Because increases in the frequency and severity of natural catastrophes are projected to reduce regional GDP by 10% by the end of the century if no new policies are taken to counteract climate change, and costs associated with the shift wouldn't exceed even 2% of GDP for comparison. So it's pretty serious because the consequences of unchecked climate change in the medium and long term far outweigh the expenses of the transition in the short term. The costs of natural disasters is one of the most obvious ways in which global warming is impacting Europe's economy. Storms, floods, and other natural disasters in Europe are becoming increasingly common and severe as a result of the changing climate, and the damage to buildings, houses, and companies as well from natural disasters is often extensive, with the economic fallout enduring for years. For instance, a big storm slammed northern Europe in August of 2021, resulting in extensive flooding and damage to infrastructure, and damage from storms was estimated in the billions of euros, and it had a significant impact on the economies of multiple countries. And to put it another way, the long-term effects of this kind of harm could result in a slowing of economic growth and a general fall in the region's prosperity. And the Climate Cost Project, sponsored by the European Union, has calculated that by the 2050s, which feels weird to think about, that if no new policy action is taken, an average of 345,000 people per year will be affected by coastal and river flooding in Europe when the increased water levels break riverbanks and sea defenses during stormy weather. And also that by the 2080s, this will have increased to almost 500,000 people annually, with annual economic costs hugely exceeding 100 billion euros. But climate change poses even more risks as well, including the potential for major tipping points to be broken, which could result in catastrophic outcomes like the melting of the Greenland ice sheet or the destabilization of the West Antarctic ice sheet, both of which could cause rapid and dramatic increases in sea levels. And ultimately, the result of that may be a six-fold increase in the economic impact on coastal areas by the century's end. Moving on, we see that agriculture, which is a major contributor to Europe's economy, is being negatively affected by global warming. It is getting increasingly more challenging for a lot of farmers to raise crops in today's warmer, more volatile climate. For example, droughts are becoming increasingly frequent, especially in countries in southern Europe. So because of this, many agriculturalists are having difficulty producing enough food to satisfy the demands of the populace, and you know what that means. Inflation for food prices, which could lead to severe economic crisis. Not to mention the fear and unrest that'll cause a lot of people who just want food for their families. But it's not just agriculture, as global warming is affecting European tourism as well. As temperatures rise, several regions of Europe are losing their allure as vacation destinations. Ski areas are suffering because the snow is melting much earlier in the year, and beachgoers are staying away because the water is too hot. That's bad news for a lot of European economies, with tourism as a major contributor to GDP. The they are very much feeling the effects of the recent drop in tourism. One sector you'll easily notice that global warming impacts heavily on Europe's economy is the energy sector. The need for air conditioning and other cooling methods rises as temperatures rise, and this is obviously putting a lot of stress on Europe's energy infrastructure, and it's driving up energy prices. Also, it's getting more challenging and inefficient to generate electricity from conventional sources like coal and natural gas as the environment grows more uncertain as the planet warms. Not to mention that Europe's energy infrastructure is being stressed by rising energy consumption as a result of the warming environment and also the oil crisis caused by the Russia-Ukraine war. So as temperatures rise, more people will turn to air conditioning and other means of cooling, which will drive up the need for electricity. But predicting weather patterns is also becoming increasingly more challenging as climate change accelerates, and because of this, energy is becoming scarce and increasingly expensive. Europe's economy, for one, is suffering because of the energy crisis, and businesses are finding it harder than ever to break even due to this as well, which has a chilling effect on economic expansion and general well-being. Moreover, European countries are finding it harder to achieve their climate targets as a result of the energy crisis because they are unable to lessen their reliance on fossil fuels. Many EU nations have already committed to reducing their CO2 emissions by over 60% from 1990 levels by 2030 in order to become the first carbon-neutral region of the globe. By 2030, it promises to spend 1 trillion euros on sustainable investments and take a number of other steps in the building, biodiversity, energy, transportation, and food production industries. A long-term ambition for the EU is becoming a climate-resilient society totally adapted to the inescapable repercussions of climate change by 2050 is also outlined in its adaptation strategy. Its 4 major goals are to improve adaptation by making it quicker, more methodical, smarter, and to assist global efforts for climate resilience. Because of its potential impact on monetary policy and financial regulation, climate change has become a priority for the European Central Bank. Still, the question of whether or not central banks should take an active approach to combating climate change by, for example, shifting the mix of their asset purchases away from oil corporations remains contentious. Why is that? Because climate change and the shift towards a more sustainable economy affects the outlook for price stability. That's what the European Central Bank stated in July of 2021 as a justification for incorporating climate change into its monetary policy framework. The cost of conforming to green policies like carbon taxes and replacing technology under the orderly transition path would lead to somewhat higher leverage, lower profitability, and a higher risk of default for the typical Eurozone company over the next 4 to 5 years. Eventually, however, the transition's advantages would become apparent. However, if the transition were to be chaotic, the company's profitability would fall by more than 20% by 2050, and the likelihood of default would increase by more than 2%. In a hot world scenario where climate action is not so much adopted, there would probably be a 40% drop in profits and a 6% increase in the likelihood of a default. Several analysts found that while banks across the Eurozone faced similar transition cost exposure, their physical risk exposure varied widely. And climate change is some sort of a substantial source of systemic risk in southern European countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain due to the increased likelihood of extreme heat waves and wildfires. Northern countries, on the other hand, are going to be hit worse by flooding and increasing sea levels, but wildfires are projected to do more damage overall. In Greece, for instance, climate change is connected with substantial physical hazards for more than 90% of bank loans. Only about 10% of financing in Germany comes from banks. Europe's economy isn't the only one feeling the effects of global warming. Economies all over the world are also feeling the pinch. And the repercussions for failing to take action to fix this problem could be pretty devastating. For the sake of the European economy and its future, European governments must take all the necessary steps to curb emissions of greenhouse gases and to adjust to a warming planet. But let's turn this back to you. What do you think can be done to remedy this bleak situation? You can tell us all about it in the comments below, and you can also subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon to get more updates on our videos. But for now, that is all we have in store for today. I appreciate you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.